Hi there. I'd just like to take the time to explain a board that I made for a cribbage board that I made for my parents, especially my dad, who helped me with many woodworking projects. I think between the two of us, we made 15 to 20 cribbage boards, kind of like this one. We did not make this. This was Emily. Emily made this. Emily, if you're watching, your board is here. But this is pretty much the template that we used for cribbage boards. However, we made many different types of boards. We made boards that fold with magnets to hold them closed, space for the pegs and the cards. We made cribbage boards with fiber optics. My father made a heart-shaped board for my girlfriend Lita. But when I was trying to think of a board to make for them, I had to make it unique, and so I had to think outside the box. The first concern I had was when playing on a board like this, is that the pegs used are normally about this size. That's 3 millimeters or 1/8 of an inch. And so you have to have very fine manual dexterity to move the pegs around the board. So I wanted to make it easier to handle the pegs and move them around the board. So instead of using a peg like this, I wanted to make a board for pegs like this. This is 15 millimeters in diameter, so 5 times the size of these. Now, if you take a board like this and blow it up 5 times, you're going to have a very big board. The family does have 2 that I know of, 2 large format cribbage boards. One is in a cottage in Falcon Lake, and the other is at a cottage in Lake Mazenau. They are basically pieces of furniture. They are in fact used as bench seats for extra seating at the kids' table. I was not planning on making a piece of furniture. I wanted to make a tabletop sized board, but using larger pegs. So trying to figure out a way of making a cribbage board that could use the larger pegs without being huge was something I had to wrap my head around. Around board. That was the way I was going to make it work, is make the board round. Now, when researching it, all the cribbage boards that take this track, they always put it at the circumference of the circular board. Now, doing some quick math, you need 121 holes for a single track, start to finish, plus 2 to hold the pegs at the start. So 123 holes, 50 millimeters for the hole itself, and say 5 millimeter gap between adjacent holes. That would be 20 millimeters times 123. That's 2,460 millimeters in circumference, which equals a 78 centimeter diameter, which is just under 31 inches. So a 2.5 foot wide board if I ran the track around the circumference. That was not going to work. There was one board, while looking for unique cribbage boards on the internet. One was a template for a cribbage board that was made to be 3D printed, and it was a spiral. And unlike this standard cribbage board, which has 4 tracks, this was only a 2-track template. So I downloaded it, or took a screenshot of it, I should say. And then we printed it out and we enlarged it so that there's a big enough gap for the holes. And this is what we came up with. It's many pages taped together. So this is going to be my template for my spiral board. And yes, this is roughly the size. And so instead of a 2.5 foot board with a circular pattern, this was going to be roughly 18 inches diameter, or 46 centimeters, rough math. So we printed this out, and I took this to Staples and I said, I need an exact copy. I did not want to work with a bunch of paper stuck together with tape. I said, I need an exact copy. Can you copy this onto a single piece of paper, just so I can work with it, something better than this? They said, sure, absolutely. Then a couple days later, they printed me out. Remember, this is 16-inch diameter. What they gave me was one printout that's 15 inches in diameter, and one printout that was 18 inches in diameter. I don't know why they did that. They didn't actually make an exact copy. They gave me one smaller and one larger. So, sure, whatever, I'll work with it. Then I thought, if I'm going to be making a large diameter board that's going to be sitting on a table, it would be easier to move the pegs around the board if you could make the board rotate. So I thought about getting a Lazy Susan bearing, and then thought, well, if I'm making such a large board, then I can just put a blank board underneath it, and so when you're not playing cribbage, you can flip it over and you actually have a Lazy Susan sitting on the table. That was my genius thought. So I ordered some plywood rounds, 1/4-inch plywood rounds from Amazon. 1/4-inch, 16 inches in diameter plywood. My idea was that I could laminate 2 of them together, 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom. Sorry, they came in a package of 4. So 2 for the top, 2 for the bottom. Put the bearing in between, drill out all the holes. We're good. When the 1/4-inch rounds showed up, I realized that it was not going to work. Trying to laminate 2 circles perfectly and make sure they stay flat and together with all the drilling and everything else, I didn't think it was going to work. So I was looking for a piece of wood, and I found this lovely piece of sapelli. Beautiful. This is half of what I got. There was another 16 or 17 inches. It's beautiful wood. It is 1 inch thick, and it weighs a lot. I realized that trying to put 2 1-inch thick pieces of sapelli, 16 inches in diameter, was going to weigh a ton. And therefore it would be a piece of furniture in itself, because you would not be able to move it easily. Once you put it down, you'd want to leave it there. So with the wood and the template, I figured it's 1 inch thick. I was planning on making the holes a 1/4 inch deep, so I thought I will saw this piece in half. But first, for some reason, you can see the mark where I made the circular template. I cut one piece down, cut half of it, made some rough cuts, cut out a piece of sapelli 16 inches in diameter. Then I had to cut that round in half. There is no bandsaw other than a commercial logging saw that would be able to cut a 16-inch diameter, 1-inch thick piece of wood down the middle. And there's no way to do it safely with any sort of power tool. I do have a portable table saw, but again, there's no way that I was going to be able to use that to cut that board in half. So I used my hand pull saw, and I sawed, and I sawed, and I sawed. Finally, after many days of dragging this pull saw around the whole circumference of the board, that was the only way that I figured that I can do it to keep the two halves somewhat equal, is by dragging the pull saw around the circumference. If I kept following the center line, it should, if I kept pulling in a straight line down along the circumference, it should come out roughly half and half. After many days, it finally came apart. I had two halves. And I put them aside and I rested. The next day I came back and I picked up the two boards and they had warped badly. So badly that there was no way I could have sanded out the curve. I didn't have any idea on if I could steam it, if I could put it in a vise, if I could soak the wood and somehow press it together to make them flat again. So I was up the creek without a paddle. So now I had these two pieces of wood badly warped that I would not be able to use. And some friends of mine were asking how the project was going because I had discussed it with them, and I made a short little video, posted it on Facebook. One of my friends watched it and she sent a message saying, I don't know what you're doing with this. However, why didn't you go to Michael's? They sell 18-inch, 15-inch, and 8-inch white pine rounds. That they had nice curved edges and they were sanded fairly well. So went down to Michael's. Sure enough, 18-inch diameter round, $25. That saved me a lot of time and helped fix a problem that I didn't know what to do. White pine wasn't exactly the wood that I want to use, but this is a creative process. It's a board that I want to try to make, trying out many different things that I hadn't done before. So white pine, 18-inch, great. And it just so happened that thanks to Staples, I had an 18-inch diameter template for it. Perfect. It's almost like they saw into the future of what I needed. However, in making the holes for the board, I wanted to make it easy to move these pegs around. And I realized that no matter what size the peg, be it the 1/8 inch or 3 millimeter, going up to 15 millimeter, if, no matter the size of the hole, if you're trying to put this and move it into different holes, you still need that fine manual dexterity. So I thought about a Chinese checkerboard and moving marbles around, and how the board was just little concave dimples, basically. And I thought that would work perfectly. I just need to figure out a way of getting these pegs to work. So I found 15 millimeter half sphere wooden blanks that matched these perfectly. And I thought about using a standard steel drill bit, 15 millimeters in diameter, because that has like a bull nose. But using a steel drill bit on something like white pine, I was afraid that it would just tear the wood apart and make a mess. So fortunately, thanks to Amazon, I found three 15 millimeter burr sets, one extra coarse, one coarse, and one fine, with, I think it's a 8 or 1/8 inch shank. Now the issue would be trying to ensure that those were all drilled to the same depth. The drill press that I have works great. However, it does not have enough room. It does not have an 8-inch radius. So, sorry, a 9-inch radius, I guess, if I'm using an 18-inch diameter template. It does not have a 9-inch radius, so there's no way that I could use a drill press to drill all the holes. However, I did find a Dremel plunge router jig. So getting a Dremel, the plunge router holder, and the flexible extension, and these burr sets would work very well. I also found these wonderful sanding wheels that made my job so much easier. They went in a grit from 120 up to 400, so they worked perfectly. However, to move pegs easily, the problem is that if you can place them easily, they can come out easily. And with a board that's going to rotate, I did not want the pegs flying out of the last position that you put them in. So I thought about using magnets. I could find small magnets that I could embed into the pieces, and then I thought all I need to do is put in nails or screws or some piece of metal down at the bottom of the tracks so that the pegs would work. I was a little bit concerned about the strength of the magnets, and putting paint or finish on the board would somehow degrade how well the magnets hold. So I thought I could put magnets both in the pegs and also into the board. And that led to another idea, that one set of pegs could have north polarity as far as the magnets at the base, north polarity in the pegs, and the other set would have south polarity in the pegs. So if you tried to put these pegs or the wrong pegs in the wrong track, the piece would not sit. The magnets would repel them. So that allowed me to have two sets of pegs, one for one track, another for the second track. And then I thought I could even make up a third set of pegs with just a nail embedded in the bottom. And so maybe a third person can play along, going in the reverse direction from the center out instead of from the outside in, using pegs that the magnets in the board would attract. So with the base, using a hand turning drill, I found a drill bit that matched the size of the magnets that I ordered. And I drilled very carefully through the base until it nearly went all the way through. And then I wedged a magnet down in there, and then I put some cyanoacrylic glue, crazy glue, in there to hold the magnet in place. I also drilled another hole a little bit offset, and then drilled a hole into the top and attached a piece of toothpick to hold the base to the top with a much stronger bond than if I just tried gluing the flat surfaces together by themselves. Then painted them, dipped them in the polyacrylic finish that I had, but that was further down the line. So those were the pegs out of the way. The magnets had to be put into the board. However, I need to drill all the holes. So I laid out the template on the piece of wood, and using a punch and a hammer, I punched the centers for where all the holes were supposed to be. And then using the Dremel with the plunge router guide, I started drilling out all the holes. However, this template is basically on like photographic poster paper, and a lot of the holes, you can see that basically I made a hole punch and punched the pieces into the board. I should have known better. I should have cleaned off all the little pieces of paper from off the board before I tried using the burr to try and make these concave holes. There was a lot of smoke. There has to be a polymer in that paper, and it was just gumming up the burr. And initially it was a lot of work, a lot of pressure, and as I said, a lot of smoke. Probably wasn't very healthy to breathe that stuff in. After cleaning off the burr a couple times, I realized that I just need to get rid of the contamination on the board, and things went much easier. After drilling, using the burr to drill down basically half the thickness of it, I decided that the edges need to be a little bit more wider, so I used a 1/2-inch countersink bit on a drill and just carefully drill them out a little bit. Then I used a Dremel tool with the sanding wheels to smooth out the interior and all the edges. So that worked very well. To delineate the two different tracks, I decided that I was going to try a quick, easy inlay technique on the wood. With the white pine, it was very soft and very easy to make a groove. I tried using the router holder with the Dremel tool, but the wood was so soft that if the router bit caught, it would just veer off and I did not want to risk that with the project. So I found that just using a very large flathead screwdriver, I could easily make a groove. And the idea was that I make a groove, I put in some epoxy tinting powder, and then use very fluid CA glue to bond the pigment to the board. I bought black powder and white powder, also gold. I didn't end up using the gold, but I needed to figure out a way of making sure that the lines were basically in the center of the area of the tracks. So you can see them here. It's these dark bands. I need to figure out a way of marking those out on the wood. So what I did was I drew tangents between the holes, and then I measured the center between the two tangents of the two tracks. Then using a French curve, I marked out the center of the two new spirals, one for white, one for black. I tried taping the board, masking the rest of the board outside of the inlay lines, and applied the powder, the black powder, and then using the glue with a very fine applicator tip, tried gluing the powder into the groove. What I found was that the crazy glue ran everywhere and the powder went with it. I also found out that the fine fibers in painter's tape would nearly spontaneously combust. When CA glue hardens, it is a very exothermic reaction, and so smoke would be coming up from the board just when the glue turned. I should also mention now that I also bought a container or a spray bottle of CA glue kicker, where if you put some crazy glue down and you needed it to harden right away, you could spray this stuff on it and it would harden the glue faster than what normal crazy glue hardens at, which is pretty damn fast. So I taped out the black area, applied the glue, ran everywhere. Realized that taping down was not the best way to go, because the crazy glue would just run and it would just adhere the tape to the board. It was more of an annoyance than anything, because when I sanded down the board, if there was tape stuck there, then it would be sanded away when I was prepping the board for the finish. So with the white, I didn't bother taping down. However, with the white inlay powder that I was using, it was very, very fine, and if I tried applying the CA glue with any sort of gap between the applicator tip and the powder itself, the drop of glue would come down and just blow out all the powder in the line, and then it would run. The powder was so fine. So the white ran even more than the black powder did. But did my best, filled it in as best I could. There were a couple times I had to go back and fill up any holes or voids or anything else. of the white and the black. So after doing the inlays, there was a little bit of concern about the inlay powders getting into the holes. Fortunately, the sanding wheels helped a great deal with the Dremel and the flexible extension. I went ahead and applied the stain to the white pine, which worked out far better than I thought it would. And let it dry for a couple days, and then after that it was just a task of embedding 246 magnets into the board. Again, using the drill bit that I used for the pegs, I used that on the board, and the flexible extension for the Dremel, because trying to hand turn the drill for 246 holes would have taken me days and days and days. The issue was ensuring that all the magnets that I put into the board had the right polarity. So I took a string of magnets, a row of magnets, and I attached it to the bottom of the peg. And then I mark one end, so I know that end was supposed to be down on the board. And I carefully pinch off that magnet and place it into the board, and then cover it with crazy glue and let that harden. So that was the whole thing, was that make a chain of magnets, ensure that they were attracted to the peg, mark the bottom, pinch it off, put it in the board, put CA glue into the hole to hold the magnet in place. A couple times, or for a while, I was using the CA kicker, the spray, just to get the magnets in there, put the glue in, have it harden, and so I can move on. However, the kicker I found would cause the CA glue to bubble and to make a very rough finish. If I left the CA glue alone, it hardened, smooth, and basically glass-like. But with using the kicker, voids, bubbles, roughness, and that should have been, it was a warning sign, because I did stop using it while I was putting in all the magnets. However, out of 246 magnets, I got 244 correct. 244 out of 246 on a nearly complete board. I went through with both sets of pegs, all three sets of pegs, and I ran the pegs through each and every hole, and two of them on the white track, the magnets had flipped. My theory was that in using the kicker, it caused bubbles to flip the magnets, and then the CA glue hardened. I was nearly in tears. But I went out and picked up a couple syringes from Michael's, some acetone from the dollar store, and using the fine applicator tips for the CA glue, I applied the acetone into the two holes that were wrong. Used a Q-tip to clean out the now gummy CA glue acetone mix, and then was able to pry up the two magnets. Reinstalled two magnets with a proper polarity, and then covered it with CA glue without using the kicker. After all that, I ran all the pegs through all the holes again, and we were good. It was then that I also decided to take care of the skunk line. The skunk line, I'm not too sure if you can, there's the skunk line. The double skunk line is right there. I was not putting in a double skunk line. I was just putting in the single skunk line. My wonderful girlfriend Lita suggested that I use Swarovski crystals. She had some. Fortunately, again, they were the same diameter as the magnets, so use the drill bit. I think it's 5mm. Use a drill bit to drill 2 holes on where the skunk line was, and then embedded 2 crystals with just a little bit of CA glue at the base. However, I still had to finish the board. I still had to put polyacrylic finish on the board. Now when my dad and I made all these cribbage boards, when it came time to finishing, I knew that there was a lot of sanding, and then you apply the finish, you sand, apply another coat of finish, then you sand, and you apply a 3rd coat of finish, and maybe a 4th. I knew that we needed a drying rack to hold the board up off the table. So one of those warped boards that I had, I embedded some toothpicks in to make a wonderful curved drying rack to hold my board off the table. But going back to when my father and I made boards, I really should have paid more attention on this process, because what I did was wrong. I probably made some very basic mistakes, but because I didn't want the Minwax polyacrylic finish to pool into the holes, I applied the finish with the foam brush and carefully painted around all the holes that I made. Carefully painted it. Then I flipped the board over. I painted some around the edge. Then I slathered some on the bottom of the board. And then I carefully put the board onto the drying rack. And I left it for 24 hours. When I got back, the board was a mess. The polyacrylic had seeped under and had dripped off the face of the board. There were bubbles. There were little humps of where the polyacrylic dried from drips. It was a mess. And also, the Swarovski crystals were now covered in finish. And I thought maybe with sanding I could bring them back, but that didn't work. So now I had to do extra sanding and sand down all the little bubbles and all the extra polyacrylic that I'd hardened. Sand it all down. The second coat went better, and I sanded that down, and the 3rd coat I applied went all right. It should be said at this time that instead of making 2 boards to make a Lazy Susan, I decided just to make the one cribbage board with the Lazy Susan bearing on a small base. So I was finishing the base at the same time. I was using an 8-inch blank from Michaels. That was the perfect size for the ring bearing. So I drilled some through holes on the 8-inch base so that the bearing could be attached to the bottom of the playboard. Attach the bearing to the base, and then using the through holes, screwed the whole thing to the playboard. Instead of plugging up the holes in the base, I just decided to apply some double-sided tape to the bottom and carefully lay out some velvet, and then cut the velvet off the base. And I actually used a lighter to try and take care of all the frayed ends of the velvet around the base. That's the board. But I forgot to tell you about the demarcation lines. Before I applied the Minwax polyacrylic finish, I examined the board and realized a couple things. The inlay for the demarcation of the tracks was not very good. There were a couple blowouts. When I sanded down the board, it ran very, very thin. In fact, I think it disappeared altogether in a couple areas. This board, you can see that there's every set of 5, there's a gap. I was not able to do that with the Spiralboard. And even though I tried making demarcation marks, one triangle, one circular, with inlay powder, it did not work out very well. The white powder did not stand out very well at all. So I needed a way of delineating the tracks better. I thought about setting in beads to mark out the 2 spiral tracks. However, I did not have the space between the holes for that. Instead, what I did was I put a cutting wheel on the Dremel and carefully cut out grooves between the holes, and then applied some paint. And that's what I used to demark the 2 tracks, one white, one black. The skunk line marker was 2 sets of 2 Swarovski crystals. Fortunately, they were 5mm, the same size as the magnets. So I had the drill bit ready. I drilled out a shallow hole, glued the crystals into the board before I applied the finish, and that was a mistake. Because the Swarovski crystals for the skunk line have been covered in the finish, and sanding would not bring the shine back to them, the luster. I had to drill out the crystals. So I drilled out all 4 using the Dremel tool, and then reset them, and it worked out well. And there it is. This is how I tried to solve the problem of my parents having a little bit of difficulty playing a game that they love and that they taught to me, and it's actually taught to their grandchildren. I just wanted to make it easier for them to play and enjoy the game again. Using the minimal amount of tools, I do not have a workshop here. all the drill press, the table saw, anything that involves a large amount of sawdust has to wait for a nice day outside so I can work in the backyard and get things done there. So I learned a lot of things, tried many different things. I've already started thinking about Spiralboard 2.0 and thinking about better ways of demarcating or demarcation of the playing tracks, how to bring back a 4-track board but in a spiral. So we'll see how that goes. Hope you like learning about this, and if you have any thoughts on the next project or anything that I missed, please let me know. Thank you very much for watching.